Okay, so this will be kind of tutorials on how to play the game, kind of focusing on speedrunning really. So I guess the first thing to start with, timing is really important in this game. It's the most important thing. When you press A to take a shot, the bar goes up and down. It moves like one position per frame, and it's 30 frames per second. So you probably want to work on having good timing. It's not very difficult, to be honest, because like you have a really easy visual cue, but you want to be like quite confident with timing. I'm gonna be using Metal Mario because that's the strongest character in the US and European versions. Metal Mario is not in the Japanese version, which makes the Japanese version maybe slightly slower, certainly slower in all courses, because in Japanese you probably want to use Donkey Kong, which gives you 10 less yards of distance and slightly less control over your shot. But yeah, I'd say Japanese is probably not really slower in 100%, but I'm not really going to talk about 100% strats because I don't really play it. Okay, so that's the first thing to say really. The mouse is on the screen. So what you want to look at on the screen to start with, you have this flag at the top that shows you where the pin is, or it kind of marks it so you know what direction to aim in. So if you move, that moves with the pin. It always stays like directly above it on the screen. So that's kind of, most of the time the courses are relatively straight, or the layout of the hole is quite straight. Some of them are really curved, so you don't always want to aim at that flag. So that's kind of brings me to this. The distance in yellow you probably want to ignore. It's just like the nominal distance for the hole. So it'll be the same for every pin position. It's just like an estimate of how far you'll be hitting the ball if you go like the intended route. So on holes that you can take shortcuts, that distance will usually be a lot longer than the remaining distance, which is the one in blue, just below. So the difference right now is only 2 yards, which is basically nothing, but it's more useful to look at the blue numbers. This one tells you how far down the pin is, or how far up it is from your current position. And yeah, I guess it's worth saying that's from your current position too. So at the moment I'm just on the tee ground, and the pin is 10 yards down from my position, which is maybe not all that useful to know, but on par 3s at least, it's good to know how far down or up you need to hit, because on par 3s you'll be hitting like directly to the pin every time. So on par 3s these numbers are really useful. If you're hitting downhill in general, you don't need as much power, assuming there's like no wind, or certainly if there's tailwind you want to reduce your power. If it's uphill you probably want to switch clubs a few times. So let's talk about clubs. You can switch clubs just by using the joystick or the D-pad, I guess, but I'm not going to talk about using the D-pad because it's really slow. You do not want to be using the D-pad. In speedruns at least, the joystick is far superior. So the bottom left tells you which club you currently have. If you're playing as Metal Mario, you'll usually, well, I think always, you'll only get the driver from the T. And you can go all the way down to the cutter. And it will tell you kind of the distance your club can hit, which is kind of assuming flat ground and no wind. You'll get around that distance if you hit your shot full power. You can switch shot types by pressing B. Power shots are roughly 10% more distance than the normal shots. The way it shows up is it's plus 10% rounded down, so from 285 yards you get an extra 28 yards for switching to power. It's not really precise, maybe, like that's just kind of a well, I guess I should talk about how that works. The distance that it shows, that's not really how far your club hits. It's quite accurate, so it is useful, but I guess as you play more you kind of figure out how far each club will go. But what's important as well is to look at your lie, which is the bottom right. You get 98 to 100 from the T, which means you can get from 98% to 100% of your distance, or your power really. Power is what the game actually uses. The distance that it shows is not how hard your club hits the ball. It's kind of complicated to explain, but in most cases you can just use that number, like it's accurate enough to be okay. But like I said, when you play more you kind of get a better understanding of it, just from, you know, like more instances of hitting the ball and seeing how far it goes. So yeah, on the T ground you have 98 to 100% of your power, and your accuracy bar, which is what we call this red line, will be the maximum size from the T. So with Metal Mario it's quite small. So this is a 3-frame window to not duff your shot. And on the weaker clubs you get a 5-frame window. So really what you need to get used to, like I said, is timing. You have to be really good at timing with Metal Mario because there's a lot of cases where you'll probably only have 1 frame. So no, put this in the rough, please go in the rough. When you're in the rough, you'll have, with this lie, there's 2 different lies you can get in the rough. This one's 80 to 90, there's also a 70 to 85, which, that one gives you a smaller window But this one, yeah, so if you were to switch to the driver now, you only have one frame to hit your shot. Otherwise you'll duff it. And when you duff it, it takes most of the power out of the shot. It just goes off in a random direction. When I say random direction, I don't mean random, by the way. I just mean it's like, it will send your shot off to the right or the left, depending on which side of that accuracy bar you stop the marker. So this is quite important. If you stop it within the red line, but before the sweet spot, which is the same place your shot starts from, then it will be like a hook or a slice. If you stop it early, you will lose height from your shot and it will send it off to the right. If you stop it late, you'll get a bit of height, but it will be sent off to the left. It will also change the spin on the board, but I'll talk about spin in like a separate part because I think spin is like incredibly important, and like I want to make an entire section just for that. So where did I get to? Okay, so I explained kind of the shot type you have. There's also approach, which I'll get to in a minute. I talked about the lie briefly, the club selection, where the pin is, how you know where to aim. So wind is like the most important random component. It's always random. You can manipulate it if you reset, but you can only really manipulate it for one hole, because basically the wind that's being selected for the next hole is updated at every single frame. That's the wind direction and speed. So unless you're tassing, there's not really a way to manipulate it for more than one hole. You can manipulate it on the first hole of the first course you pick, only if you reset and kind of mash through the introduction cutscene so that you know which frame you're starting on. Which kind of you have probably a 50-50 chance to get the wind that you want. It's not really something we do. So, since this is training mode, we can change the wind direction just to kind of explain it. The way Boo is facing is the way the wind blows. So this is Boo is facing away from me, so the wind is behind me, which we call a tailwind. In that situation, it will like, as your ball is flying, it will pick up a lot of speed from the wind. And then we have like crosswind, which would be if it's facing left or right, which is like, it doesn't make much of a difference really. And then if the wind's blowing towards you, it's a headwind, which will slow your ball down a lot, depending on the wind speed at least. Wind speed in the US version goes from 0 to 21, it's in miles per hour. In the Japanese version, and I think the PAL version as well, the European version, both use meters per second, and it goes from 0 to 9. The strange thing about that, really, I don't know why, but if the wind is below like a certain amount, which in the US version is 3 miles per hour, it will just be set to 0. So you can only get 1 or 2 miles per hour in training mode. It's not really worth using them, in my opinion, but yeah, it's good to know, I think. And on the first hole of a course, you will never get 0 miles per hour wind. It will always be non-zero. Some other thing they put in the game for no particular reason. Another thing that's worth noting about the wind speed, what it shows on the screen is not actually how strong the wind is. It's like a rounded off value. The wind speed is actually really precise, but they don't give you that information. So you only see from like 0 to 21. There's like tons of values in between, but generally it doesn't really make a difference because the amount it affects your ball for the shot lengths in the game, it doesn't really make a difference. Like, you can just use the number that it gives you and work out how hard you need to hit from that. So, that's wind speed and direction. If you're playing, well, any character really, you can use the wind speed. Like, if it's not a tailwind, then it's usually really helpful because you can use it to slow down or speed up your ball. Well, you can use a tailwind to speed up your ball, but it might seem counterintuitive, but being able to slow down your ball is probably one of the things that you would have to learn to speedrun this, because if your ball is always moving too fast, it will be really difficult to get close to the pin. But yeah, this comes into what I want to talk about with spin, which I'll do later in another part, because it's quite important. There's also two types of weather. There's rain or there's clear. When it's raining, well, you can tell that it's raining. What the rain does, you'll lose some distance on your shot. It will, because the ball will kind of slow down more. When you're putting, it won't move as far on the ground. It's roughly like a third or so that you need to add to your putt length to get the right distance. It does vary a bit, but it's generally adding around 1/3 is okay. For longer putts it may be slightly less than that. But yeah, the ball will also bounce less and move around less, so that's the weather. It's rain is also random. It's, what is it, 12.5% chance of rain? No, it's 25% chance of rain. It's what am I saying? Yeah, it's 1 in 4, 25% chance of rain on every course except Shy Guy Desert, which is 1 in 16 chance of rain. So on most courses you'll expect to get maybe 4 or 5 holes that are raining. It doesn't really work out like that because it's random, but at Shy Guy Desert you can expect 1, maybe 2 holes of rain if you're playing through it at once. I didn't talk about approach shot yet, so that's not good. I'm looking at my computer screen, so the timing is a bit different than my TV. I will take that shot again. So the third type of shot is the approach shot. which when you're within 60 yards of the pin, you press B and it switches to approach rather than power. It actually locks you out of using power shots, which you shouldn't really need to do, but basically when you're using approach, every club will be limited to 60 yards, but you still want to club up really. The difference it makes is that clubbing up reduces the height and increases the speed of the ball. So in general, like, you want to club up at least once or twice. It's kind of slow to keep clubbing up. So you can usually switch to like a 9-iron and then take your shot normally. So what have I not explained? Oh yeah, something that's really important that maybe is not obvious because you wouldn't expect the game to work this way, but it does. Okay, so you can press R to view the grid. You can also use the C buttons to zoom around the position of it. But generally R is faster if you want to look at the grid. The grid is like almost useless, to be honest. If you're not on the tee ground and shooting from like perfectly flat ground, your ball is not going to go where the grid is. The way it works, the grid is like in a straight line from where you're facing, and the distance away it is just depends on this number here, which is how far your club should hit. But because that's not exactly the number that's used in calculating shot power, the grid is not always accurate distance away, and it's not adjusted for your lie either. So if you're in the rough, or if you're in the bunker, your grid is going to be much further away than how far you can hit the ball. So that's good to know. It's really only useful if you're playing a character with a straight shot. Otherwise your ball is going to be moving in the air and you really have no guarantee it's going to land anywhere near the grid. If you're on a slope as well, like, the grid is completely inaccurate. You don't want to be looking at it. It's only really useful from the tee ground. And even then, like, it's only useful to line up your shot. It's not really useful to see where it's going to land. However, what the grid does do is show you the elevation. So when it goes blue, that means the ground is sloping down, or it's below the midpoint of the grid. If it's red, then it means it's above, so you can see kind of the slopes on the ground, so you know where your ball is going to roll, which is really important in putting. I'm going to get this onto the green.
Nice shot.
It's not the green.
Nice on.
So I guess the last thing to talk about is putting. When you're on the green, the grid is like very important because it shows you what the ground is. So you can see it slopes down there because it goes all blue. So you have 3 different putters, short, middle and long. Generally, you want to use short for anything below 24 feet, something like that. Or at least that's the distance that's easiest to use short. Technically it's almost always faster to use middle, but that's something I'll talk about later because that involves a more complicated strategy. So basically you have 30 feet for short, 100 feet for the middle putter, 200 feet for the long putter. You'll probably never need to use the long putter unless, say, maybe Mario Star Hole 8. You can get some really long putts on that if you drive the green from the tee off. And then the long putter is useful-ish. The problem with the long putter is that you hit the ball so quickly that it's going to bounce a lot. And when your ball is bouncing on the green, that's usually bad news because it will keep its speed in the air. Or mostly it will keep its speed in the air. There are some situations where it seems to lose speed, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but so yeah, any putt that goes over 100 feet, you're probably going to have difficulty controlling it, and it will be like it's a lot different from using the middle or short putters, since those tend to stick to the ground most of the time. I guess I'll quickly talk about putting distances. So, on the short putter you have quite a bit of room for error. This is a 8-foot putt. You can probably hit between around this mark to this one. You usually want to go for a harder putt because the ball will move faster and go in faster, if it does go in, which hopefully it should. You always want to play thinking your shot will go in, so you want to kind of hit it in at the maximum speed. I'd say good kind of markers to use. You want to hit around halfway for anything that's 10 feet. Anything that's around 12 you want to hit around this mark. Around 15 to 16 you want to hit here. And around 20, something there. Really, if you want to go over 20 or around 22 to 24 feet, you want to switch to the middle putter and hit around this mark. High 30s will be around here. 40 feet putts are for some reason really difficult to hit. Yeah. If something's just over 50, around here. High 60s, you want to hit around the 75-foot mark. 80s or 90s, something quite close to full power. For putts that are around 45 feet, you can use this mark here, but it's really difficult using the long putter because each kind of increment is around, well, it's a little less than 10 feet really. So you'll basically miss if you go too much or too little. So it's really difficult to control. You probably do not want to use the long putter if you can avoid it. Oh yeah, and on the green if you press R, it sends the camera facing opposite you. So you can use that to look around, but in general you don't want to be doing too much aiming in a speedrun. So you kind of want to be able to memorize the layout of all the holes, which might sound difficult because there's 108 of them, but it's not really you play through it a few times and you just you get it. I might make some videos on like strategies for individual holes, but I won't talk about that now. I think I didn't mention, but the other thing about the grid, it does show you how far up or down from your current position the ground is. So again, that's only really useful from the tee off, because with Metal Mario you can make every green in 2 shots. So again, most of the time you'll just be using these numbers up here. I guess if you really want to, you can change the grid colour to black. I just use white. I don't think it doesn't really make a difference for me, but I don't know, you might find it easier to tell, like the red and blue if it's black than white. So what else? I guess I'll briefly say, putting spin on your ball, you can hold down the Z button to do that, and that will stop you from aiming your shot. What you can also do is that when you press A to take your shot, you can just hold a direction and it will work. That's what I prefer to do, but some people don't. Some people use the Z button. And the final thing, I guess, I haven't really talked about the power bar, but wherever you press A, that sets the power, and it's basically it's, maybe I should use the mouse. It's 30 frames for the bar to go from the right to the left. So each mark that you can stop at is basically 1/30th of the power of your shot. So for this shot it would be around 10 yards. Yeah, I think the way that this works is quite self-explanatory, but you should work on the timing. One thing you can do is when you take your shot,
nice shot.
You want to be holding down the Z button like all the time when the ball is moving, because it will speed it up when it's on the floor. You can also do that on the green. But on the green it works a bit differently. Like, you can only speed it up after it passes the pin. I don't know why, but yeah, that's just how it works. So one last thing I wanted to say for this part. Let's see, hole 12. So holes like this, you have really big elevation change. You generally want to take a lot of power off of your shot, but usually you don't want to club down. You're obviously like, clubbing up is useful if you need to get more distance for your second shots, and you will club up a lot, but you'll very rarely need to club down. You might do it if maybe you're not quite used to playing, but the way that it works, stronger clubs, the ball actually moves faster, so that's why it's not a good idea to club down. So for shots like this, because it's a long way down, you want to take off quite a bit of power, but like, there's not really much use in clubbing down. I guess that's just what I wanted to say about that. You usually want to club up if you're hitting it uphill, but you don't want to club up too many times that you don't have the height to get up the hill. You can use power shots to get a little more height, really. So for this part, I think that's all I needed to say. Yeah, I'll end it here. and I'll go on to the next part.